Okay, we're back, and hopefully you can't hear the cat still meowing in the background. Arr, cat driving me crazy. Anyway, we were learning about loops, and specifically while loops. And a while loop was something that took this format where we had a Boolean expression and then a block of statements, and we learned that that entire block of statements executes before we test the condition for the second time. In fact, first the condition is tested, then we execute the entire block of statements if the condition was true, then we test the condition again, and if true, we execute the entire block, and eventually, when the condition is false, at the end of executing that block of statements, when the condition is false, the loop exits. And potentially, the condition will be false from the very beginning, in which case the loop will never run, and none of those statements will execute. And we learned how to write a loop, that the key idea is to think to yourself, what repeats? And of course you must identify that something repeats if you're using a loop in the first place. What repeats? That goes in the body of the loop. And I find it helpful to ask myself, when should the loop stop? And then to consider the opposite condition, when should it keep going, and when should it keep going becomes the loop test. So this second question of when does the loop stop is really just a helpful question along the way, since Java expects us to write when the loop should keep going instead of when it should stop. Alright, let's go back to the task at hand, and in fact, let's load this up so you can see it again. So here's my robot in the hallway again. Pardon the cough again. And my plan here is I want the robot to darken all of the squares from where the robot is to the end. And some of those squares are already dark, so I'm going to need to deal with making sure I don't darken a square that was already dark, because as you remember, when I darken, let's do that. If I darken a square that was light, no problem. But if I darken that same square again now that it's dark, I get an error message. And if I get an error message in the middle of my program, the entire program stops and the robot won't proceed to darken the other square, so that's a big problem. I don't want to have any errors. Okay, so I'm going to ensure that all squares from the current square to the wall are dark. How do I do that? Well, I already anticipated using a loop, and I wrote this whole form out. I recommend you do this. Write out the whole form of the while loop, all the syntax with the parentheses and the braces, so that now we can proceed like a fill in the blank and just figure out what's the body and what's the test. I know I need a loop because I want my robot to keep going, and I don't know how far to go. So I'm left with this idea of a loop. Now, what is it I want to do repeatedly? Well, I want to repeatedly make squares dark, and I want to repeatedly check if I'm at the end. But checking if I'm at the end is not an action. That's part of the loop test. The action I'm going to perform repeatedly is making a square dark. So let's do that. How do we make a square dark? Well, we need to make dark, and and upon making it dark, we need to move. We don't not only make dark repeatedly, we move repeatedly. So one thing we might worry about is, did we just write this code excuse me, in the right order? So that's a good question. Let's think about it. As we go forward, that will become a big issue for us. So make dark and move. Now, then I'm supposed to ask myself, according to my questions here, when should the loop stop? When should the loop stop? Well, the loop should stop when the robot's at the wall, which means when the front is no longer clear. When should the loop keep going is what I really need to ask myself now, and the loop should keep going as long as the front is clear, since we're going to stop when it's not clear. So while the front is clear, I'm going to make dark and move. That sounds straightforward. Let's give it a try. So it's compiling. I hit F5. It's compiling now. We'll load up that lovely hallway again. I'll show it to you. Here it is. And then we will darken to the wall. How do we do that? That's excuse me, that's in a file called lesson.java. So if I say lesson.darken to wall, it should carry out these instructions. Let's go. Oh, rats. I talked all about not having an error, and here I have an error. Well, it happens to the best of us. And to me. Alright, an exception. At this location, it's already dark. Yeah, I know, it's already dark. I can't call make dark when it's already dark. So no problem. That sounds like a time for an if. If, right, this condition I'm writing now has nothing to do with when to exit the loop, but it does control whether or not to make dark. I want to move either way, but I only want to make dark if I know it was not already dark. So I know how to test if I'm on dark. So I can test if I'm not on dark, like this. If I'm not on dark, make it dark, and then move. And do that entire thing with the if, the making dark, and the moving over and over again inside this loop, which will exit when the front is no longer clear. Alright, take two. Let's load up my hallway. There it is. And let's darken to the wall. Go. Ooh, much better. Much, much better. Victory! Oh, uh-oh. By the way, to the wall, remember, the edges of the world are also considered walls, even though you can't explicitly see those lovely brick walls that appear in some of these worlds. And you can't see it also, but this robot is actually at the edge of the world. So it has indeed reached the wall, so to speak. But the square at the wall didn't become dark, and my rule here was that I'm supposed to ensure that all squares from the current square to the wall are dark. So what's going on? How do we fix it so it darkens that last square? Right, because we said bail out of the loop when the front is no longer clear. Well, the front's no longer clear, but I still needed to do this if it's not dark, make it dark business. Right? I want this to happen at the end. So you may be thinking, well, maybe Dave, maybe you meant to move and then make it dark if necessary. Let's try that. We'll compile and we'll load up my lovely world. Okay, I know I'm not sure if you can hear them meowing, but I'm sure you definitely can't smell the terrible stink that has just arisen in my house because of that stupid cat. Alright, here we go. Darken to the wall. Go. How did it do? How is it doing? Well, I'm pleased that it darkened the last spot, but I'm disappointed that it didn't darken the first spot. It was supposed to darken all of the spots from the current square the robot was on all the way to the wall. So we seem to lose either way, right? Either we move and then we deal with the darkening, or we darken and then we deal with the moving. And whichever way we do that, we end up leaving a square blank. Here's why. In this example, I have, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 squares. Well, that means this code needs to run 10 times. But how many times does the robot need to move? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 moves. 9 moves, 10 make darks. Or 10 if make darks anyway. That tells me something's wrong with this plan of executing a move and an if make dark, the same number, right, both inside this loop over and over again. It seems like I need to deal with one more make dark, then move. So there's a couple ways we could fix that. First of all, I want to go back to the original way, where we first test and then move. And just to remind you of what that does, I'm recompiling. Now you can see one of the joys of Dr. Java is sometimes it is awfully slow at recompiling, although there's also a possibility that's because my Windows machine is trying to update right now. Really? Really, it's still going? Okay, well this would be a wonderful... Oh, nope, fine. I was going to teach you the meaning of life, and then we ran out of time. Okay, you're out of luck. Here we go. There's my world again. There's darken to the wall. That's what it was doing originally, where we bail out of the loop right after moving, where we haven't yet made that square dark. So one solution is we'll take this code that does the test and make dark. Yeah, that meowing is getting louder. Cat is getting closer. Okay, we'll take this code and we'll just run it one extra time. And the way we can run it one extra time is we can include an extra copy of it at the end of the loop, right? Once the loop stops, we'll just perform this one more time. If it's still not on dark, make it dark at the end. And if that looks hard to read, then maybe we should define a little helper method for us that says, let's call it ensure dark, right? It's going to guarantee that that position is dark. And the way we're going to do that is by taking this if not on dark, make dark, and plugging it into ensure dark. So now, I think I've increasingly made a mess. Everywhere where we made it dark, only if it wasn't dark, we'll say ensure dark, which is a method in my lesson file. Remember, that's the file I'm inside of right now. And that doesn't look so bad. It looked ugly when I had duplicate, that if code duplicated, but maybe it's not so bad if I have two calls to ensure dark, one in the loop and one outside the loop. Let's give that a try. Load my hallway, darken to the wall. Okay, the first cell's dark, and the last cell became dark. This is good. Now, we should probably test a whole bunch of different scenarios, but I want to just do one other thing. So, and that one other thing is, what if we had written move before ensure dark? When we do that, the problem that we ran into, and I'm loading this up so you can see it again, the problem we ran into is that we missed the first square. The first square never got darkened. How can we fix that? Well, we can simply ensure dark one more time before we enter the loop. But no matter what, we need one more call to ensure dark, then we call move, right? So if the loop runs n times, we'll now have n calls to move and n plus 1 calls to ensure dark. And that makes sense. I need to darken one more square than I move, since there's one less move than there are squares, since I'm already on a square when the problem begins. Let's see that and convince ourselves that this sequence of code also works. And you can see that first square is dark, and so is the last square. So here's a second way that we could write that same code. Alright, I'll see you in the next video where we'll take a closer look at some subtleties of loops, and then we'll begin to solve some more interesting problems than simply darkening the squares in this hallway. I'll see you there.